Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the RevOps Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Jordan Henderson, and typically this is where I would say I'm joined by your co-hosts, Jonathan and Brandon, but they are actually not joining us today, although Brandon is our junior producer and is going to participate in the chat, I'm sure, and I will try to ignore those so that you all don't have to deal with him this week. But we have a special episode today, and I'm super excited because we're going to sort of do something wildly different to than our recent podcast. And this is a very special episode because we have some very special announcements to make. So I'm joined today by the Chief Marketing Officer of Revenue.io, William Tyree. William, do you want to say hi?
Hey, Jordan, it's great to be here. You almost said ringDNA, didn't you?
I was so close. I had to pause and think about it, but it rolled off the tongue the right way. Ultimately, we almost had to scrap the whole thing.
That's right. Great job with that.
Definitely going to take some getting used to, and over time, I'm sure I'm going to mess that up over the next couple months, and that's just going to be something we have to deal with. So we want to do something a little bit different, right? So we've just rebranded ringDNA into Revenue.io, and this is a very intentional rebrand for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it's because of RevOps, frankly, right? Like that's one of the things that's driving, this decision and what we're doing. And so what we're going to do today is, rather than me sort of interviewing people and driving through the conversation, I'm actually giving up hosting duties for the first time ever in the history of the RevOps podcast to William. So William, go ahead and take it away. Let's do this.
Well, it's an honor and a burden to kind of take that over from you. You do such an awesome job. But my hope is that today you actually get to talk a lot more than you usually get to talk.
I don't think our audience wants that, but we're going to find out.
Oh, there's pent up demand. You have no idea. Awesome. Well, we will get to the rebrand in a little bit. But first, I want to just ask you a few questions because I think this is a great opportunity just to kind of dive into a few topics like, the role of ops today, the role of RevOps in creating great customer experiences, all that kind of stuff. So let's start with an existential question. So how would you describe the mission of an operations team today?
I love we're starting with existential, by the way. I don't think we've ever done that. It's super exciting. Man, how would I describe the mission of an operations team today? It's changed so much. From a revenue operations team, my mission today is twofold, really. It's aligning my teams internally, marketing, sales, customer success, finance, legal, like everything that ever touches the board, to my customer experience. And that's that to my buyer's experience, right? Overall, that's the end of the mission. And it feels like it's a proactive strategic partnership now, mm-hmm. which is not how I would described operations many years ago. How I would have described it years ago would have been, I am keeping this plane in the air as it's flying, right? Like I am doing what needs to be done to keep this plane flying. And now operations is, I am making this plane fly faster. I'm making this plane, fly with more fuel efficiency. I'm making it's actually taking initiative to make things better versus just trying to keep it afloat, which feels like where we were even 3 years ago in a lot of places.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think when you think about the history, right, of ops roles, especially in B2B companies, I kind of trace things back to an article that I remember way back when. It was in the 2000s. It was in Harvard Business Review. And I think the title of it was something like How to End the War Between Sales and Marketing. and for years, I really thought that it seemed like operations teams were kind of growing and flourishing to try to implement solutions that would get marketing and sales more aligned, often through data or for processes and things like that. But it felt like there was this incremental process and desire to, do things better, like route leads faster and more accurately and things like that. But yeah, it does seem like the ops function now, if it can be called a function, but the ops team is really something that's far more strategic now than functional.
Yeah. Totally. And to your point, right? Like if I think about it now, and I truly mean it, like we have the revenue operations team at ringDNA, right? And we are a standalone, function that is working with marketing, sales, customer success. And any given day, as an ops person and an ops team, I might be working on marketing things strategically, or sales things, or CS things, or finance things. All of it focused on a better buyer experience, right? Super, super important. When I look back 5 years ago, And 5 years ago, I was a sales ops manager who also owned CS ops, which was an absurd thing to think of for most human beings in business because that just didn't exist. You had sales ops and another CS. There was a CS ops person and a marketing ops person, and that there was no alignment between your teams. You never even spoke to those people for the most part. And that we've come so far since then. Now that I spend all of my time with the rest of the ops folks. We work on everything together, and that gives us the ability to strategically align our teams. We're not just saying, hey, I got to fix these problems for the sales teams. It's, hey, this thing is working really well in sales. Let's figure out what we can do in marketing to better support that. Let's figure out what we can do in customer success to better support that, right? It's getting to that level of strategicness that's really changed rapidly over the past few years.
Oh, completely. You do so many things. I mean, your team does so many things. And I know that when I say you, I'm also talking about ops leaders everywhere, right? But when you think about, the things that, you just could not live without today that ops teams deliver, what are maybe 3 top things that come to mind that are absolutely mission critical?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many good revenue operations leaders now, which is really a fun thing. And there's people like Rosalind Santolena out in the world, like putting out incredible thought leadership content. And somebody I learned from a bunch, and they might have 3 different points here too. That's just why I love this, right? Like everybody's sort of trying and figuring this out and doing nice things. But if I had to pick 3, number one for me, things that we provide that I think are you can't live without, and once you live with them, you certainly can't live without them. Data at the point of decision, and I don't mean. For me, this is sort of like a twofold point. People think of data at the point of decision of I need to look at data to make like broad company-wide decisions and like mandates, right? And that's certainly part of it. Like those should be data-driven things, and I should have that data when I want to make that decision. Sure, that's kind of like low-hanging fruit, though, right? Like I think everybody agrees that yes, I need data to make business decisions. Like yes, of course you do. If you're not doing that, problems. But what I really like about data at the point of decision is micro decisions. And I think about when your sales rep comes in any given day and they open up their call list, they have to make a decision. Who am I going to call first? What am I going to focus that call around? Like, what am I going to say? What's the value prop? What questions am I going to ask that person that's going to help that conversation be better? That way I can qualify them for an opportunity. That way I can create some pipeline. That way I can close some deals down the road, right? Those are all decisions that they have to make. They're micro decisions, but they're still decisions. And you need to provide them data to make better decisions there. Because if I can power them with data, if I can have that sales rep open up their dialer and have, hey, this person came in on this campaign, you should call them and ask this question. And then they call them and they ask that question and the person answers and a pop-up says, hey, ask these 3 questions because that was a great answer. And here's the 3 things to answer, right? I'm now giving them all of this data and all these insights as they're making the decisions in real time, makes that decision easier for them and makes the conversation better. Once reps have that, they can never go back.
And that's amazing. And I think, I'm glad you could put the example out there because I think when you say data at the point of decision, a lot of people would assume that's like, in a meeting, you're looking at like how your sales funnel is going and trying to like see where people are getting stuck and things like you're actually talking about something that's really, I think, critical and soon to be pervasive across business, which is real-time guidance. In that specific example, real-time conversation guidance, correct?
Totally. Yes, 1,000%. And once people have it, it is data at the point of decision. It is definitionally what that is because it's saying, hey, they've said this. We've determined that the best answer or the best follow-up question by looking at all of this data is this. Ask this question because it's going to help you have a better conversation and it's going to help you create more pipelines. It's going to help you close more business. It's going to most importantly, though, not just have a better conversation. It's going to help your buyer trust that you understand the problem they're experiencing. Right. And that comes back to, okay, RevOps is aligning us to our buyer's experience by using things like real time.
Perfect. That's right. Okay. That's
one. That's one.
That's what I was going to say. That's one. Okay.
You said you wanted me to talk more today. Here we are. I'm excited. It's an exciting announcement. So I'm obviously very, very piqued with energy about what's happening.
Okay. So 2 more things that Ops delivers that you can't imagine living without.
Yeah, and they sort of layer on top of that, right? And so another thing that I think Ops delivers is scalable insights. And that's sort of layers into real time and that sort of thing, right? The easy example there is I can go look through all of my calls and say, hey, we get this objection this amount of times. David on our sales team handles that objection with grace every single time. Like just perfectly handles it right. Everybody else getting crushed by it. How do I scale that across my team? Because we obviously know we've made the insight that this is the right way to do that. How do I scale that across my team? And again, I would use something like real time to say, you've gotten this objection, answer this, right? And there's obviously like training components that go into that. There's taking that from a revenue operations standpoint. I would then take how David is handling that over to the marketing team and say, hey, marketing team, how can we tweak our marketing materials to field this objection before it ever gets to us, right? There's those pieces as well that revenue operations can provide that are just going to smooth the whole process, like reducing friction by scalable insights.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think it goes back to, we talk about across teams, right? And I think that goes back to even marketing. Like if you think now what you're talking about is super sophisticated, right? But at a more basic level, but no less important in my mind, is what an ops team does for marketing. Like, for example, if we get really granular insight into things like, success rates on certain types of MQLs, whether they're by territory or by like account tiers or industry or whatever, we start to see patterns in there where it's like, wait, people are kicking ass in these two territories or these three segments. What's going on over here? We've got an issue. Is that an issue with our training of the person who's working that? Is it an issue with the leads? Or have we not even done the work that we need to try to understand that persona in the right way? Right. So for me, that's a scalable, that's something where you actually help marketing scale. Amazing.
Totally. And I think that, but you bring up a really good point, because I think this is the thing that people miss, is that revenue operations provides scalable insights across your revenue operation. Because I think a lot of times, like a marketing team thinks, I need to scale that insight to all my other marketing materials. That never gets down to sales. That doesn't get to CS, right? And the same thing happens in sales. They don't push that stuff back to marketing so that marketing can adjust and scale better. But it's scaling it across the entire organization, downstream and upstream. Right, that's the very important piece there that's being provided, and I mean, heck, we've had it happen here where y'all have been like, hey, we're running this campaign focused on this specific product, and all of the people with this title are converting on it. Like they seem really interested in it. We're like, okay, great. Like outbound team, like sales outbound, call this title. Like please call this title. Like it's working. It's changing our entire approach because we've found some insights on you. Let's scale it across the organization.
That's right. Absolutely.
And then lastly, which sort of makes sense, this one's maybe a bit of a stretch because it doesn't feel like you're actually providing something that people are like, this is a tangible thing you're providing, but an aligned revenue operation, I think is a very important thing to note that revenue ops is providing, right? Like we're actually taking the top-down business goals. I'm not beholden to the sales goals. I'm not beholden to the marketing goals. I'm not beholden to anything else. I'm beholden to Revenue.io's goals as a company. And part of my job is to strategically work with marketing, sales, customer success to make sure you guys are too, that we all are. And that way we're all aligned and we're all making the same tweaks and the same adjustments, and everything that we're doing is focused on the same results. And that way we work better together. I don't think that sales reps, if you asked a sales rep, hey, like, is this a valuable thing? They wouldn't maybe care, but it is valuable. And so I'm adding it to the list.
No, it's super valuable. And I think that there's, if I could, I think there's two components to that. One is, I think that there's a lot of people who talk about RevOps out there, and they kind of immediately go to how your organization is structured and titles and things like that. That is important, and I want to get back to that in a minute. But I also think that the way that most companies do this is through data. I mean, think about all the things we've just talked about. It really is, creating, sort of data-driven organizations, insight-driven organizations, right? So I couldn't agree more. I think that you can align these teams by having a common frame of reference, common kind of North Stars with you. And that's with all this granular data that actually, makes it possible for you to make these, decisions on demand, so to speak, and so forth. But I do want to also circle back, though, and say that, we did a RevOps study last year. And one of the most perplexing answers on that was, who's running your RevOps organization? And that was really interesting because almost everybody we asked was like, oh, we're building RevOps. But when you asked who was in charge of it, There was like, I think the biggest, the single biggest answer in the pie was other, right? And when I looked at a lot of the write-in answers, it was like, yeah, junior goat herder, region
Yeah.
6, right? And it was just like, I think that, along with all those insights, I do think that having sort of like an ops team with that kind of research, so that you can kind of be there truly in an empowerment capacity across marketing, sales, and success is super important.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I mean, I have a friend who's a wonderful RevOps leader, and he reports to the controller now. Like I don't understand it. I will never understand it. But like to your point, yeah, like having that aligned to part of that is aligning your RevOps team to your business goals. If they're aligned to some weird title, they're aligned to that person's goals, which fundamentally misaligns the entire revenue operation. So
Completely. Well, it's good. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how we empower these teams. Now let's kind of move it up a level and say, I want to ask you, how do customers and buyers benefit from RevOps? What's in it for them?
So much. It's just such a hard question to answer. And I've said it like a billion times in my life, but everybody thinks revenue operations. Typically people say, oh, like revenue operations job is to align marketing, sales, and customer success, right? There's a prepositional phrase at the end of that, which is to the buyer's experience, which is the most important part of the entire thing, right? And we typically, a lot of people chop it off. I disagree with that entirely. And that's strategic, right? Because if you think of like, we have a bunch of data that's like 1 in 10 buyers think a seller can actually understand their problem, right? That's terrifying. 1 in 10 buyers think if they talk to a sales rep, yeah, like how many bad experience, who hurt you, like it's bad. And then 66% say they're treated like a number, which is why 1 in 10 think somebody can actually understand their problem, right? Like nobody wants that. And there's reasons behind that. And they go back to what RevOps provides, is that if 66 people feel like they're treated like a number, it's because when that rep calls them or goes to action that deal, they don't have any data informing them on how to treat this person differently, like an individual, based on the wants and needs that they have, right? If I don't have that data at that point of decision, I'm going to treat them like every other person that I've talked to this week. Because how else do I know how, right? And so if I'm not enabled with that data at the point of decision, that's what happens. And that's what 66% of people are experiencing. Because as a buyer, if you're working with a company who's focused on RevOps, you shouldn't experience that. You shouldn't feel that way, because you should feel like they understand your problems. They came into that conversation knowing the right things to ask you to understand your problem. And that leads to a better conversation, which then leads to building trust, and then leads to you actually thinking they get it and they're a consultative, person in the approach. Also then using all of the insights from your best sales calls to inform and train your sellers to actually understand the problems. There's a big difference between asking the right questions and acting like you understand a problem versus actually understanding the problem that you are solving for that person. And all of that comes back to providing them the data, providing them the tools, providing them the insights that they need to have the conversations that let that be a reality. And that's something your RevOps team has to hold.
I couldn't agree more. And I also think some of it, a lot of work goes into providing a consistent experience across all those teams, right?
Yeah, so good. So good.
I mean, like, just think about, not even outside of B2B, think about just like a regular consumer experience. Let's say that, like, if you ever bought a car the old way, which is, you maybe you even reserve the car online or whatever, you show up at the dealership, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you're sitting there for hours, right? And then you'll get a seller coming over and he's on one page, and then he'll go away. Somebody else comes over and says, hey, by the way, like, here's the offer, whatever. And we're like, wait, where was the guy I was working with? And they're not on the same page. The deal that they just put before you is maybe not even your deal. It's like, or it's a deal without terms that you just negotiated, right? And then you get in front of finance and it's not there. I think that same thing happens to a lot of B2B buyers, whether they're talking to support, success, sales, and certainly marketing. Often, marketing, if there isn't a good RevOps presence in place, marketing is sending emails as if that person is not engaged whatsoever. and serving up social as if that person, that account is not engaged when, they might be close to closing a deal.
Yeah, 1,000%, right? So many times that will turn you off. Like I love your example of the car dealership. It's perfect. So Brandon, who is our, like I said, junior producer today, so he's not going to join, but he already said I'm talking too much, just so everybody knows in the chat. But appreciate that input, Brandon. He and I did this is sort of an example of a terrible experience, but we were sort of working with this company. We did a speaking engagement for them, actually. And after the speaking engagement, they sent us emails that said, "Hey, sorry we missed you at our speaking engagement. We were the speakers." Like, what do you mean you missed us? Like, no, we're not going to work with you. Like, this is done. Like that experience is so bad, but it's like a really simple example of, you got to know where people are in their relationship with you. And you got to have that in a way that's usable by sales and marketing. So you don't do that, because you will burn that bridge so fast. And once you've done that, you can never recover from it.
You know what? That is a ludicrous example. That's just not just bad. It's ludicrous. But I have to say, it's not unique. I've had that happen to me twice, right? Where I've even got a call from a rep, I'm like, "Are you actually doing a discovery call on me?" I was like, "I actually spoke at your event."
I was on the panel. What are you talking about? Like,
right.
Yeah, it's incredible. I want to respond and say like, "Oh, sorry, I missed it. Can I get the recording?" and see if they'll follow up. That's
good. Okay, great. So kind of moving on, we talk about all these things that RevOps can do for customers, for buyers, for the revenue teams themselves. Let's talk a little bit about operations enablement. Okay, so what things do op teams need to make RevOps happen? Right?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there's a lot of our audience typically, I think, is sort of in this world of trying to do, these things and running into roadblocks. And I think it's a great question, because we've never really dove into what it takes to do this. The first and foremost, most important thing, and I am absolutely certain if Howard Brown was sitting on this podcast with us, he would agree, is executive and organizational buy-in. That you cannot do the things that we're talking about doing unless your organization is bought into doing those things. If your organization wants you to be a sales ops person, and that's what they believe that they need is siloed teams, this is impossible, right? Like that is not going to be a thing that powers this. So you need that executive buy-in, you need the organizational buy-in, and that includes aligning your ops team to your business. I've talked about it a little bit. It's not aligning to sales, not aligning to marketing. It's aligning to the overall business objectives. And in ringDNA, we obviously do that with our own standalone ops team. Super important. But that can be structured, I'm sure, different ways. I'm sure there's CROs that can support that, COOs, that sort of thing. But then sort of beyond that, because that's true, but what am I going to do about it? Uniform system record. I need a database, so that way I can track everything for everybody. That's just true. Very simple. And once you have those two things, then you need processes and tools that power the revenue operations with the data you actually need to create visibility for your teams and create the insights and like map those things and read them and distribute them out to the appropriate people, right? So I need to be able to put data in front of my sales reps when they need to make those micro decisions. At the same time, I need to be able to put data in front of my management team and my leadership team when they need to make decisions. I need to have the tech that's not only tracking all that data, but also pushing it out so that everybody can see it. And huge bonus, if it has AI capabilities, so it can help me come up with what those insights are. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about doing a lot of things. And the AI component of this is no short thing, right? And so something that can say, hey, here's 3 things you might want to look at is super helpful for me in a RevOps standpoint. Because then I can go look at those things and say, hey, these 2 are really valuable. Let's scale those across the teams, right? And that would be like an ongoing thing, right? Like the consistent processes and tools in place to do these things, but tools that are going to actually power your system by talking to your system of record, by giving your reps data at the point of decision, by giving your leadership team data at the point of decision is fundamental. You can't do this job without it. That's just the reality. You can't do it well. You can try. I wouldn't do it. I honestly would. Yeah, it keeps me up at night. And then sort of lastly is you need the impetus to actually affect change proactively, right? Like it cannot be a reactive job. You actually have to have the buy-in from the level of allowing you to go in and strategically partner with teams and do these things and make that a reality. And I know that's a lot. I've just said a lot of things.
It's your manifesto.
Yeah, a little bit. What did I miss?
I don't think you missed anything. I think it's great. I think, look, in summation, I think that, look, if, given that all of the above is true, right? I think RevOps teams have a great chance to create better buyer experiences, and more importantly, though, and this kind of leads into our next section is helping sales, CX, and marketing really understand what's working and do more of that, right?
Yep.
Or as I like to call it, nail it and scale it.
New name for the podcast, the Nail It and Scale It podcast.
TM. Yeah, there you go. But we are gonna ask that question, right, of other people, like other operations teams, like outside of revenue.io.
Yep.
What's a favorite story of yours of how you helped your teams do just like that, right? But before we ask them, what's one of your favorite stories? What comes to mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it's sort of interesting, right? I think that there's a lot of like home run stories. There's also just minor tweaks are sometimes like the funnest, sexiest piece of revenue operations. We're like, let's make this like one little minor adjustment here when it comes to like this specific campaign, and then that results in this incremental growth. Let's tweak these 5 things. Let's increase everything by 2%, and that's going to be much better incremental growth. So the big sexy ones are a little hard to come by, but I have one that I always think is quite fascinating. Prior to joining revenue.io, which I'm now getting right, by the way, perfect, nailed it. I was at a company called SocialLive, and we sold live video streaming software. And essentially what it did is it allowed you to live stream video to like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn all at once. So you could like simulcast with editing and stuff. The obvious use case for this being everybody's going to use it for marketing, right? And so the entire approach, the entire organization was oriented around, let's sell this for marketing. And we actually brought on a customer that was a gym franchise and sold it as if it was a marketing deal. Never had any idea. They bought it and never once used it for marketing. And we came to find out, through finding out, gathering insights from the organization, what are our use cases? Like what are people using us for? And they were using us as training software. They had decided that they were going to use the recording capabilities of the software to cast out training videos for everybody and training their own trainers. So they had to certify trainers. They had to like do all these things. They had 500 locations. They needed everybody at those locations to submit videos and that they could be reviewed and certified as a trainer to keep the brand tight. And through that, we realized, holy crap, this is a huge market that we are not addressing whatsoever that we're good at. Like we are really good at this. And we had no idea. And so taking that insight, and this is like a really low-hanging fruit thing, right? Taking that over to the marketing team, say, hey, marketing, like we need to go after enablement. Like we're not just marketing anymore. We're going after enablement teams. Like training and enablement is perfect. And hey, sales, like we're going after gyms. Anybody who's a franchise-based organization that has to do training, that's us. Like that's our bread and butter. And it changed the whole business. Within like a year, 40% of our revenue is from that avenue. Just absolutely foundationally changed everything about us. And our product team, then we took it to product and said, hey, like we met with them and said, hey, what can we do better as a training and enablement software? And they gave us insights. We went to product and had them build those things. We basically fundamentally changed the company based on this, and it worked. It was awesome.
That's a great story. One tweak basically opens up, like a huge revenue vein. It's great.
Yeah. And we probably don't talk about it enough on here. It's why customer success is really important in your revenue operation, because they're seeing the things that are actually being used for, and they're seeing what's working, they're seeing what's not working, and they're seeing the product improvements you need to make for the things that are working. And that needs to go back to marketing and sales and product so that you can drive your product to create a better buyer experience, frankly. Like it goes all the way back to the same thing.
That is so true. That actually reminds me of a story too, where the same thing. So, this was a company that had a mix of kind of cloud and on-premise solutions, but it required significant kind of deployment, like on-site and retail locations. And a lot of our strategy ended up getting informed by believe it or not, a piece of research that we were working on. So we knew that we had all this AI powered data that would point to industry trends that would be very, very important to our buyers, right? So we actually went to our implementation teams, our customer success teams, essentially, and said, "Hey, here's what the data is showing. What are you seeing on the ground? Can you put this into some things that we can understand?" And we started looking at it, and we started seeing trends that actually we realized, oh my God, like there's a gigantic opportunity here. Here's 3 of the best talking points that that just aren't even making it into the rest of the organization. And that completely it led frankly to our best quarter ever. Just taking some of those lessons learned.
Amazing. And now, and think about now, right? Like, because that's such a great story of, hey, like we were doing research and we came across this.
Yeah, for thought leadership, the research was going to drive leads for us.
Yeah, right. And it changes our business. And now think about if you could do that and you had real time. So you could then say, hey, these are the 3 things we're not doing. Let's put that in real time. Let's really scale this using technology across our organization. That impact from that research would have been just a billion times more even, right? Like just insane. That's awesome. Such a good story. All right. So what I want to do next is bring on a couple of guests to share with us their favorite RevOps stories about aligning sales, CS, and marketing. Welcome, everybody. And I'm here today with Maria Bras, the North American Sales Manager at Rock Content. And Maria, thank you so much for joining me. Today we're talking about all things RevOps, just sort of high level. And what I want to hear about, what I'd love to hear your take on is RevOps team helps sales, CX, and marketing understand what's working and how to scale it. So just simply, what's one of your favorite stories of scaling what's working and what's not working across an organization?
For sure. So that's always tricky, especially since most of us are remote now. And a lot of us are used to working in the same building together. So some things have got to evolve and be adjusted over time. And one of the more specific things that I've really loved partnering from our sales department with marketing and really helping with alignment and messaging. Right now at my team, we're building out our North American market. It's brand new. We're doing a lot of testing and really trying to determine who is our ideal audience and what's going to resonate with them. So have really enjoyed working with marketing on developing our unique perspective in the market, testing it, and then just like overall being on the same page and giving feedback based on cold calls of, what's interesting to our prospects. And that way too, that can fuel their ebooks that they're putting out and webinar topics and things. And so we've really tried to band together to ensure that there's not a disconnect. And then on the flip side of that, with the leads that they are generating, we put in place this process that's super easy. It probably takes our demand gen manager 5 to 10 minutes, but after any sort of campaign that they're doing, whether it's after a webinar or they just release an ebook, before they send any sort of leads over to sales, they fill out this simple Google Doc of, who is our target audience, what is the messaging, what was the main light bulb moment from the webinar, so that sales is better equipped to have a strong conversation with those prospects. And then they, in turn, deliver the feedback back to marketing, and they're always really interested to learn so that we can adjust over time. So I think that those are probably the 2 main ways that we've been able to scale what's working and learn a lot from what's not working too.
Yeah, that's awesome. So from like the first example, what I'm hearing is using like cold call data, for example, to actually say, hey, here's what's resonating when our sales reps are making a cold call. And you have call recordings, you can go pull that, you can go find that information. Here's what's resonating. Hey, marketing, this is what's resonating. Your webinar should be focused on this. Your content should be focused on this. Your ads should be focused on this, right? Because that's going to help us convert more. And then we're equipped on the sales side to have that conversation because we're already having that conversation, which is super easy, right? So that's an awesome example of an upstream feedback loop. And then on the sort of inverse of that is keeping it really simple is totally fine, right? Like a Google Doc or a Google form that allows marketing to just send you like, hey, by the way, like we're making this campaign, we're running this initiative, like here's all the things we're thinking. We want your feedback on it. Like sales team, you're going to be the ones that actually have to deal with the results of what we're doing. Like here's a Google form. It's simple, but it's totally fine. Like it's an immediately actionable thing for anybody that wants to have any sort of communication. So I love that. Yeah. And anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's been helpful just because, that Google Doc that's able to share those specifics about a webinar. Hopefully our sales team is able to attend the webinar and learn firsthand, but, sometimes they can't always make it, right? So getting that sort of SparkNotes version really helps equip them to have more powerful conversations on the phone and just make more out of those leads that they're getting, because we've all been there, I'm sure, in sales. I have, at least, where you've just gotten 20 leads from a webinar and you're like, what am I supposed to talk to these people about? Like I wasn't able to attend and I have to follow up with these leads very quickly. And so this just helps us really, I think, be more efficient in that follow up too.
You've just said a thing that I think is the most lovely thing I've heard a sales manager say in a long time, which is have the people handling the leads from a webinar attend the webinar, right? Like I think that's so often overlooked. I think that's such like no, they'll go view it later or they'll figure out how to convert the leads. No, they won't. They need to attend the webinar. I love that. It's an awesome requirement.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. It's been awesome, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Jordan.
So, William, what did you think of Maria's favorite RevOps story?
Awesome. That was really interesting. I mean, I got to be honest, I'm thrilled because I've never actually heard of an operations team actually acting in that way. I mean, one, trying to help marketing figure out what's working and not working from a messaging perspective, which I really love. Sounds like it's almost, fulfilling sort of the analyst role, a traditional analyst role on the marketing team, which is great. But yeah, a couple really interesting things there. I've had experiences in the past where we strongly encourage sales teams to attend the webinar because they are being fed from the webinar. Absolutely. And I love the fact that that's something that's actually happening and being enforced. To me, that would be a best practice, or at least it seems like it would be a best practice. It's utopia. And I absolutely love that. I also really intrigued by the idea of the Google Doc. I think pretty often what happens is, say, marketing and SDR teams have that weekly meeting, like, hey, what are the leads like from the campaign? And a lot of times you'll have data where saying, hey, we're maybe not seeing that many conversions, or it looks like those are converting to meetings really, really well. Tell me some background information. But what I love about the Google Doc is it gives marketing something really to react to before they go into meeting.
Yeah.
And then they can actually ask better questions. For example, hey, we're seeing X percentage of a conversion rate to, meetings from that campaign. But I also saw in some of your notes that some of these people seemed like they were completely the wrong leads. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah. Totally. No, I totally agree. The attending webinars thing is immediately going to be a requirement at Revenue, because it's
right.
So good. We're immediately implementing that. And yeah, to your point, like I think every company does what you're saying is like, have like a weekly meeting where we'll give feedback on the leads. But the reality is you miss so much feedback because of that. It's not really scalable. And what happens is everybody waits for that meeting to deliver that feedback, and they forget half of it by the time they get into that meeting. And something as simple as a Google Doc, I mean, that is, everybody listening can go do that now, immediately. And it's going to give people an avenue to give that feedback in real time to the marketing team. And then you can still have that meeting and talk about it at a more in-depth level. Nobody's blindsided by some feedback. It's actually digging deeper into it so you can make better changes. I love the ideas that Maria brought to the table.
Absolutely. And I also think that it could be a stair step too. It could be on the surface, it seems like a bit of a crude feedback loop, but it's a feedback loop, right? What you can do beyond that too is there's all kinds of platforms and solutions that you can get where you can actually send a variety of signals on leads back to the marketing team. And that's just another way of kind of aligning. So
yeah, and it's totally in line with what we're doing here. I mean, that's exactly what we're building, right? So it's
Right.
awesome. I'm here with Asia Corbett, the head of revenue and community operations at RevGenius. And Asia, I want to ask you a question that we've asked a handful of RevOps leaders, and I'm super curious your answer. So RevOps teams help sales, CX, and marketing understand what's working and how to scale it. What's one of your favorite stories of scaling, of what's working across an org?
Yeah, so I'm thinking specifically of a time of having to build a custom, quote unquote, attribution solution. We didn't have a sophisticated attribution tracking tool to tell us where our pipeline is coming from in one single place. So sales was like, I don't know where this deal is. I mean, if they didn't generate it, they're like, I don't know where this deal is coming from. I don't know what marketing things they're interacting with. And marketing's like, when, that she's doing her reporting, she's like, yeah, I think I'm generating this much pipeline, but are my programs effective or not? And so once that was kind of prioritized, okay, what do? We don't have money to go buy visible. What can we do in the meantime? And so between the two systems that we had, I built sort of a hack to gather all of that information in the systems from sales or marketing and put it into one field, one source of truth, so that both teams or anyone really who goes into the CRM could see, all right, this is a marketing generated, or it was sales generated, and then sort of what are the things that they're interacting with if it was marketing generated. So sales team, the sales leadership can see, well, we're getting a lot of people coming from webinars, or that's things that they're interacting with, or they're downloading a lot of our content on our website, and then they're getting into the pipeline. So maybe we should double down on content generation. And then should CX be interested in it and they're living in the CRM too, they can also see where people are coming from. So it's really helpful to be able to have that in one place and not have to go and log into different systems or look at different views or different fields.
Yeah, it's like you're talking about basically identifying in a really simple way. You called it hacky. It doesn't sound super hacky. It worked, which is what really matters. Hacky is an important term in the RevOps world. So
yes, lots of things.
But what you're talking about scaling is what marketing efforts are working, right? And you're gathering that information and scaling it across the team by making it available. Simple as that, right? Like I'm putting that into Salesforce that my sales reps know. This type of content is actually converting to opportunities, and marketing knows that, so they know where to double down their efforts. Sales knows what messaging is meaningful to those leads. They know what messaging they should be using in cold outbound. CX knows what was important to that person when they converted to begin with, so they can target their relationship on solving those problems for that person. It's just making that data, which is one field worth of data, available to an entire revenue operation to scale it is a really powerful and easy thing. And then you could build like 1,000 things on top of that, right? Like, hey, this exists. Let's run whole campaigns and do all these things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. It's like there's one tiny thing you don't think about, and you don't think about maybe the work or the effort that goes into it to produce this one thing that's going to help the entire funnel, the entire go-to-market engine.
That is such an important note for everybody listening who's not in revenue operations. When you say, hey, can we just put the last touch campaign in a field in Salesforce? It's like a 4-day project for somebody somewhere. And it is one field in Salesforce, but it can be a really big lift. And it can also be really transformational for your business, which I think is the other piece that's super important. So cool. I love the answer. Thank you, Asia, for dropping in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Asia, one of my favorite colleagues in the space. I'd love to hear your take on her favorite RevOps story, William.
Obviously, attribution is so important. I think that's a great story right there. I think that's what operations should always be doing, right? Is trying to just help, not just marketing, but everybody figure out, what's really working and what's not working. I also think that attribution becomes, it's important for every business, but for B2B companies that are selling to larger companies, it's just everything, really. I mean, typical sort of like e-commerce company, attribution is really important like coming in off the lead source, right? But if you're selling to, if you're selling the kind of deals that take like a year to close because they're multi-million-dollar deals or at least like six-figure deals, knowing what pieces of marketing content are being engaged with often and frequently during the deals that close and the ones that don't close even is super important. It brings to mind something that I always look at, which is like what percentage of all deals that closed actually had, engagement with marketing content. I'd say if you're selling, deals that are like $3,000, $5,000, I wouldn't expect the engagement to be super high. But if you're selling ones that are really significant, I want to see that number be pretty close to 100%. Mm-hmm. And I think what we see here, for example, ringDNA is pretty typical for B2B or healthy B2B companies where, six-figure deal, you're going to see somewhere between, if it takes 3 months to close, 6 months to close, 10 to 12 pieces of marketing content at least kind of be engaged with that deal. So, and that's exactly that kind of metric. When you really look at that and you start to see how everything stacks up, that's, I think, what tells you what's working and what's not working.
Totally agree. It goes. I know it's a metaphor I used earlier on a different question, which was, like RevOps is. We used to be like making the plane fly, figuring out how to make the plane fly. And now we're figuring out how to make it fly faster, and make it fly more fuel efficiently, right? And like just fly better, essentially, right? And something as simple as attribution, if you get it right, which I wouldn't say it's simple because attribution probably is not something that anybody would ever say is simple. But no. Getting it right is so important across your entire revenue operation and making that data readily available for everybody at the point where they need that data, right? So when sellers go to call, they know where this lead came from. When marketers go to pick which campaigns they're going to run, they know which campaigns are being successful. When CS goes to work with their customers, they know where they came from, so they know what's important to them. Like it feels like a very simple thing, but making it available, transparent, and alignment across the entire revenue operation for it will actually make your company, fuel efficient is the right word, right? Like we have better marketing spend, we have better sales focus. Like it is more efficient and a better way to work. So I love that she touched on attribution. It's a very hard thing. And so I love that her example was one of what I would say one of the hardest things to do right in revenue operations, but it's such a good one.
Absolutely. I think the other critical thing she said there that I think a lot of people need to hear, I was going to say a lot of marketers need to hear, but I think everybody, is the importance of actually asking the ops team, what is the level of effort to do this or that, right?
Because I appreciate you so much right now, William. So much.
Just because, like, sometimes she is completely right. Depending on how you're set up and what the attribution model is, there can be a butterfly effect to adding a field, that makes you have to change a lot of other things, right? So, and then other things, like sometimes I'm surprised, it's just like, oh, I figured that would be weeks. Yeah. It's like one switch. So but yeah, absolutely. Like level of effort, scoping that and not making any assumptions is just so critical. And I was really happy to hear her mention that.
I was very happy to hear her mention that. It's also a thing that I meet with a lot of RevOps folks, and it's a thing that I actually consistently seem to tell people is, you should proactively be transparent about that. Like, there's no problem. I have no problem if you messaged me for something saying like, hey, that's actually like a 3-hour project, so maybe we'll get to it, by Friday of this week. Like, why not be that level of transparent about what this is and what that looks like, right? We should be, because then it sets proper expectations across the business, and that's super important. It's a really important thing. So yeah, I loved that piece. I really appreciated her bringing that. Asia always brings the heat on those. So. Now it's time for how we always end the RevOps podcast. This is the first ever Revenue.io RevOps podcast, and we will make the noise here. It is time for This Week on LinkedIn, because we have to keep some things the same. And so, This Week on LinkedIn, ringDNA, I get to say it this time, announced that they're now Revenue.io. My inbox has blown up with people asking why this is happening. And so, William, how did you decide to change the name from ringDNA to Revenue.io? And what does it mean to you?
Well, thanks, Jordan. I think that it's super exciting. We're incredibly excited. And I think that, part of this is the market. Part of this is all the things that we've been talking about, right? And it's certainly true along our trajectory. When we started as ringDNA, we thought that's the perfect name for the world's greatest sales dialer, and all the context and all the insights that you get in from that, right? Like, talk about uncovering what's working and what's not working. From a basic level back in the day, it's are my reps calling the right people? What are they saying on those calls? We have all these open opportunities. Are they even getting touched? All those kind of fundamental questions, right? But what we've seen is a market transformation that happened toward revenue operations. So, yes, we still offer the world's greatest sales dialer. It's now called ringDNA, by the way. But it's so much more. What we see as ourselves doing right now is really enabling the future of revenue, right? And the data kind of proves that out. So whereas a lot of our customers came in, looking for that single product, maybe with a couple of add-ons, the overwhelming majority of new customers now, they're looking for solutions that frankly are going to help them implement RevOps. They want to capture engagement data across sales, CX, and sometimes support and marketing, right? They want to analyze that data, deliver those insights at the point of decision, as you talked about before, and most critically, really serve that up in moments that matter. So we really see ourselves as making these revenue teams and certainly sellers as well, just much more efficient, much more productive, and so part of this is just really listening to our own customers, and just delivering sort of a brand that is more embodies what we're delivering today.
Yeah, totally. It's aligning our brand to the problem we're actually solving in the tool we're providing, right? Like the platform we're providing. We power revenue operations. That's what we do. We
Right.
power your entire revenue operations. We help you scale things across the organization. We help you find insights and make your sales reps better and make your marketing team better and make your CS teams better. And all of that results in one thing, more revenue, right?
That's right.
Pretty simple. Like,
you're absolutely right. I mean, yes, things like productivity increases. Those are still important to people. Volume is still important to people, right? But ultimately, I think that the world's greatest sales teams want more. They really want us not only to power better productivity, scalable insights, all that kind of thing. They want us to surface and recommend next best actions. So, just couldn't be more proud to kind of be part of Revenue.io, a brand that does that every day.
I totally agree. And powering those next step actions is a thing that reps will soon not be able to live without as soon as they've experienced it. So it's an exciting thing for sure. And yeah, same. I am proud of the rebrand. I'm proud of everything that the team has done internally to make this happen, just from a product, sales, marketing, everybody's standpoint. Really, really awesome work. I mean, anybody who's been through a rebrand also knows how hard that is. So kudos to everybody that had huge fundamental pieces of that. And any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, I think we're at time.
No, just thanks for all your efforts. I mean, you've put in a ton of effort on this, so just really excited to move forward.
Same. No, and thank you so much for this. And everybody, thank you for joining in on the special episode of this. And I know it's a whole new format, but I'm really excited to try this out. And William, thank you for taking over hosting duties for a day. It was really fun to just be interviewed. Everybody, please subscribe, review the podcast, share it wherever you can. Feel free to reach out with your questions for this week on LinkedIn, and then follow William and myself. You don't need to follow Jonathan and Brandon on LinkedIn. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks so much, William.
Thank you.